My wife of 3 years, Serafina, once told me my hands were too calloused, too stained with the soil of my own vineyard. She said it with a pitying smile while booking a 2-week trip to Monaco on my credit card. I later discovered that, while I was nurturing the legacy my father left me, she was methodically trying to poison its roots, diverting millions to bankrupt the company and steal it from me in the divorce. She thought she was dealing with a sentimental old fool who loved his grapes more than his bank account. She was half right. What she didn't count on was that a man who understands the value of deep roots also knows exactly how to tear out a weed. My revenge wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about orchestrating a harvest of ruin she would never forget. Sometimes, the only way forward is to burn everything down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Part 1. The Endless Giving. The fog in Napa has a weight to it, especially in the early morning before the sun burns it off the valley floor. It's a cool, damp blanket that settles over the vines, a daily baptism. For 40 years, I've walked through that fog, my boots sinking slightly into the rich, dark soil of Blackwood vineyards. It's a feeling of belonging that seeps up through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. My name is Robert Blackwood, and I am 61 years old. My hands are, as my wife Serafina, or Sarah as she preferred, so often pointed out, permanently stained with the earth. A Vintner's manicure, I used to call it. She never found that funny. Sarah came into my life like a flash flood after a long drought. My first wife, Mary, had passed away a decade earlier, and the vineyard had been my only companion. It was enough. The work is cyclical, demanding, but honest. You tend, you nurture, you wait, and you harvest. The vines don't lie to you. They don't flatter or deceive. They either thrive or they wither, and the reasons are always there in the soil, the water, the sun. People are more complicated. I met Sarah at a charity auction, one of those glitzy Napa affairs where people spend $50,000 on a case of wine to prove they can. She was stunning, of course. 40-something, dressed in something that shimmered, with a laugh that could cut through the dull hum of polite conversation. She told me she was in acquisitions, a vague but impressive-sounding term that I later learned meant she acquired things from wealthy men. She claimed to be captivated by my authenticity. "You're a real man, Rob," she'd said, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You build things, you have roots." It was a line, I see that now, but a damned good one. I was a man who'd spent his life cultivating roots, and I was lonely. We were married within a year. My father, who had passed 2 years before I met her, had been a shrewd, cautious man. He'd seen the world for what it was, a place full of beauty and predators. His voice was a constant echo in the back of my mind. "This vineyard isn't just grapes, son. It's our blood. Protect it." Heeding that echo, I had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Sarah had balked, a flicker of something hard in her eyes before she softened it into hurt. "Don't you trust me, darling?" "I trust you," I said, a lie I was already telling myself. "This is just business. The vineyard is a separate entity. It's a legacy." What I didn't tell her was that my father had gone a step further. His legendary attorney, Eleanor Hawkins, a woman with a mind like a steel trap, had helped him establish something far more robust than a simple prenup, the Blackwood Family Legacy Trust. It was an ironclad fortress designed to protect the vineyard and the family inheritance from any and all external threats, including, as Ellie had dryly put it, gold-plated marital entanglements. Every acre, every vine, every bottle, and every dollar earned from them was segregated as my separate property, untouchable. For 3 years, I chose to ignore the warning signs. They were small at first. Her disinterest in the actual process of winemaking was palpable. She'd walk through the fields in 4-inch heels, complaining about the dust. She called my loyal, hardworking vineyard manager, Miguel, the help. She saw the vineyard not as a living entity, but as a backdrop for her extravagant parties and a personal ATM for her shopping trips to San Francisco and beyond. "We need to modernize, Rob," she'd say, gesturing vaguely at the century-old oak barrels in the aging cave. "This place is so rustic. We should be a brand, not a farm. Her idea of modernizing involved hiring expensive consultants who produced glossy reports filled with corporate buzzwords like synergy and brand activation. They all recommended the same thing: spend more money. More marketing, more events, a new visitor experience center that sounded more like a luxury mall than a winery. I was generous. I wanted her to be happy, to feel a part of what I was building, what my father and grandfather had built before me. I gave her a lavish allowance, funded her vanity projects, and smiled as she held court at dinners with people whose names I could never remember. I told myself this was the price of companionship in my later years. The first real tremor came about 6 months ago. I'd earmarked a significant portion of our capital, $5 million, for a crucial infrastructure upgrade. We needed a new drip irrigation system to conserve water in the face of another looming California drought, and our harvesting equipment was on its last legs. It was a vital, non-negotiable investment for the future of Blackwood Vineyards. Sarah, surprisingly, took a keen interest. She, who couldn't tell a Cabernet Sauvignon from a Sauvignon Blanc, suddenly wanted to oversee the project. "Let me handle the financials, darling," she'd purred, massaging my shoulders as I sat hunched over spreadsheets in my office late one night. The office smelled of old paper, leather, and the faint, sweet scent of fermented grapes that clung to the walls. "You're the artist, the man of the soil. Let me be the businesswoman. We'll be a power couple." Against my better judgment, fueled by a bottle of our 08 reserve and a desperate desire to believe in the life I'd built with her, I agreed. I gave her signatory authority over the investment account. It was the single greatest mistake of my life, and the first step toward my own vindication. The giving, I realized much too late, was never going to be endless. It was a transaction, and I was about to find out the true cost. Part 2, The Serpent in the Garden. The discrepancies started as whispers in the numbers. 1/10 of a percentage point here, a rounding error there. I've always balanced my own books. It's a habit my father drilled into me. "The numbers don't have emotions, Rob," he'd say, his finger tracing a line on a ledger. "They just tell you the truth," and the truth was getting ugly. The Modernization Fund, as Sarah had grandly named the $2.5 million account, was showing strange activity. Payments to vendors I'd never heard of, consulting fees to firms with no online presence, wire transfers to an entity called Apex Strategic Holdings LLC. When I asked Sarah about it, she'd wave a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets catch. "In the light, it's just boring logistics, darling, spreading the payments out for tax purposes. You wouldn't understand." The condescension was a familiar sting, but this time it was accompanied by a cold dread. I started digging. Late at night, after she was asleep, I'd retreat to my office, the quiet hum of the wine refrigerators my only company. I pulled the incorporation documents for Apex Strategic Holdings. The registered agent was a man named Gavin Reynolds. A quick search revealed he was a disgraced former investment banker from San Francisco, his license revoked for gross financial misconduct. His specialty: creating shell corporations to hide assets. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I felt a profound, hollow sickness in my stomach. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer, calculated nature of the deception. The woman who slept in my bed, who ate at my table, who wore my family's name, was systematically bleeding my legacy dry. She wasn't my partner. She was a predator. The catalyst, the single moment that shattered any remaining illusion, came on a Tuesday. Sarah thought I was in a meeting with distributors in the city. I'd come home early, my head pounding with a migraine. As I walked up the stone path to our house, I heard her voice through the open window of the sunroom. She was on the phone, her tone sharp and venomous, a world away from the sweet, purring voice she used with me. "Of course he hasn't noticed, Gavin. The old man is too busy sniffing dirt and talking to his dead father. He thinks this is about new tractors. He has no idea we're setting up the kill shot." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. The world tilted on its axis. "The $2.5 million is almost fully transferred," she continued, a smug satisfaction in her voice. Once the Vineyard's financials are in the red for 2 consecutive quarters, it'll trigger a covenant in their bank loan. They'll be forced into a distress sale. And with the capital we've secured, Apex will be the only bidder. We'll buy it for pennies on the dollar. A cruel, sharp laugh. He's so sentimental about this pile of dirt, he'll be too broken to fight back. Then, my love, we finally own Napa. My love, the words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just financial sabotage. It was a conspiracy. She had an accomplice, a lover. I was being played for a fool on every conceivable level. I backed away from the door silently, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold, clear rage rising within me. The fog in my mind, the one I'd allowed her to create for 3 years, finally burned away. I saw everything with a horrifying clarity. Her feigned interest, her compliments that were actually insults, her modernization plan that was nothing more than a blueprint for destruction. She wasn't trying to build a brand, she was trying to bankrupt me. She wanted to strip me of my name, my home, my life's work, and my father's legacy, then pick the bones clean with her lover. I stumbled back to my truck, my hands shaking. I drove to the highest point on my property, a bluff overlooking the entire valley. The neat rows of vines stretched out below me, a testament to a century of Blackwood sweat and dedication. My grandfather planted the first rootstock here with his bare hands. My father fought off corporate buyouts in the 80s that would have turned this place into a soulless wine factory. And I had let a serpent into the garden. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest. But beneath it, something else was taking root. A cold, hard resolve. She had called me a sentimental old fool. She was about to find out how foolish a man can be when you threaten the only thing he has left to love. She thought she was setting up a kill shot. She had no idea I was about to start loading my own gun. The harvest was coming, but it wouldn't be grapes I was collecting. It would be receipts. Part 3, My Father's Ghost. The next morning, I drove to San Francisco. I didn't go to my distributors. I went to a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the financial district, the kind of building that hums with the quiet, ruthless energy of old money and high-stakes law. I was there to see my father's ghost, or the closest thing to it, Eleanor Ellie Hawkins. Ellie was in her late 70s but possessed the sharp, predatory focus of a falcon. She had been my father's attorney and confidant for over 30 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, behind a pair of intimidatingly stylish glasses, missed nothing. She was the architect of the Legacy Trust, the legal fortress my father had insisted upon. Her office was a monument to a brilliant career, mahogany desk, leather-bound books, and a panoramic view of the bay. She greeted me not with a handshake, but with a knowing, sad look. "Robert," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "I was wondering when you'd finally call. Let me guess." "It's about the missus." I sat down, the plush leather of the chair offering no comfort. I told her everything. The Shell Corporation, Gavin Reynolds, the overheard phone call. I laid out the entire, sordid plot. I spoke in a low, flat voice, the rage and hurt banked down into a cold, hard ember. When I was finished, a long silence filled the room, broken only by the distant cry of a seagull. Ellie steepled her fingers, her gaze unwavering. "Your father was a brilliant man, Rob. He was a romantic about his wife and his vineyard, but a hardened cynic about everyone else. He saw Serafina coming a mile away. She swiveled in her chair and pulled a thick, leather-bound document from a shelf. The Blackwood Family Legacy Trust. She placed it on the desk between us with a soft, definitive thud. "He called her a predatory bloom," Ellie said with a wry smile. "Beautiful, fragrant, but utterly parasitic. He knew her type. That's why we built this." She tapped the document. "This isn't just a trust, Rob, it's a weapon. It explicitly segregates every asset related to the vineyard. The land, the brand, the inventory, the profits, and your inheritance, as your sole and separate property, impervious to any marital claim. Community property laws in California are strong, but a well-drafted trust like this supersedes them." I felt a sliver of relief, but the knot in my stomach remained. So she can't take the vineyard in a divorce. But what about the $2.5 million? She's already siphoned it. She's trying to bankrupt me, Ellie. If the business goes under, the trust won't matter. This is where Ellie's smile lost its wryness and became something sharp and dangerous. That, Robert, is where things get interesting. The trust contains a penalty clause, a particularly vicious one your father insisted on. Article 9, Section B. The faithless partner clause. She flipped through the pages, her manicured nail finding the spot. It states that any action taken by a spouse that is proven to be a deliberate attempt to defraud, devalue, or otherwise cause material harm to the assets within the trust not only nullifies any and all potential claims to marital assets, but triggers a full restitution penalty. In short, if we can prove she intentionally tried to sabotage the vineyard, the court won't just deny her a dime. It will order her to repay every cent she took, plus interest and legal fees. A slow, cold understanding washed over me. This was my father's true legacy, not just the land and the vines, but his foresight, his protection from beyond the grave. How do we prove it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She's already showing us how, Ellie said, leaning forward. She thinks you're a fool, she's arrogant, and arrogant people get sloppy. You overheard one conversation, I guarantee there will be more. Her plan requires her to cripple the vineyard, which means she has to keep moving that money. She believes she's untouchable. Then she laid out the strategy. It was brutal, elegant, and utterly terrifying. You do nothing, she said. You go back home and you play the part of the sentimental old fool. You let her think her plan is working. You let her drain the account. I stared at her, horrified. Let her, Ellie, that's the lifeblood of the vineyard. We'll miss the planting window, the equipment. It's a calculated risk, she cut in, her voice sharp as glass. A temporary financial wound in exchange for total annihilation. We need more than a suspicion. We need undeniable proof of her intent. Proof that will stand up in court and not just win you a divorce case, but potentially open her up to criminal charges. We need to give her enough rope to hang herself, her lover, and their little shell company. She laid out the next steps. We would hire a forensic accounting firm to trace every dollar she moved, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. And then the masterstroke. Your office, Ellie said. At the vineyard, where does she have these conversations? Mostly in the sunroom at the house, or sometimes she takes calls in my office at the winery. She thinks it's a blind spot. Good, Ellie nodded. We're going to turn your office into a recording studio, audio and video. We'll install discreet surveillance. We'll catch her red-handed, in her own words, detailing the entire conspiracy. It's an aggressive move, but in California, it's legal to record a conversation if there's a reasonable belief that it could uncover evidence of a crime being committed. Financial sabotage of this magnitude qualifies. I left Ellie's office feeling like a different man. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but the impotent rage had been replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was a hunter. I was going to follow my father's plan. I was going to let the serpent deeper into the garden. Also, I could watch her walk right into the trap he had set for her years before she even knew my name. Part 4. Setting the trap. Living with Sarah for the next 2 months was the hardest acting job of my life. Every smile I returned felt like a lie sticking in my throat. Every time she touched my arm, my skin crawled. I had to play the part of the oblivious, slightly befuddled husband she believed me to be. I'd ask her about the irrigation project, and she'd pat my cheek. It's all in hand, darling. Gavin is a miracle worker. He's found us incredible deals. The name, Gavin, dripped from her lips with a casual intimacy that made my blood run cold. I would just nod, a look of placid trust plastered on my face, while inside I was calculating, observing, and waiting. The surveillance installation was a covert operation worthy of a spy novel. On a weekend, Sarah was at a spa retreat in Palm Springs, a trip I knew she was taking with Gavin, thanks to a discreet private investigator Ellie had hired. A team of specialists swept into my office at the winery. They were quiet, efficient, and left no trace. A tiny, pinhole camera was hidden in a smoke detector. A high-fidelity microphone was concealed within the base of my antique desk lamp. When they were done, the office looked exactly as it had for the last 30 years. But now it was a listening post. I watched the money leave the account. $250,000 here, $500,000 there. It was like taking a knife to my own arm and watching myself bleed. My vineyard manager, Miguel, a man whose father had worked for my father, came to me with a worried look in his eyes. "Roberto," he said, his hands twisting the brim of his hat. "The supplier for the irrigation pipes called. They said the payment was canceled. The harvest, it will not be good without the new equipment." Are we in trouble? Lying to this good, loyal man was one of an endless series of small, sharp pains. "Just a small delay, Miguel," I said, forcing a reassuring smile. "A new financing strategy, don't worry." "I have it under control." He nodded, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. That lie cost me a piece of my soul. The waiting was agonizing. I'd check the remote feed from my phone a dozen times a day, my heart leaping at every notification. Most of it was mundane. Sarah on the phone with her socialite friends, complaining about the quality of the local catering. But then, on a Thursday afternoon, I hit gold. I was inspecting the Chardonnay vines, the grapes small and hard, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the office camera. I stepped behind a row of vines and pulled up the live feed. There she was, pacing my office, a glass of my best Pinot Noir in her hand. She was on a video call. On the screen of her laptop, I could see the smug, slick face of Gavin Reynolds. I put in my earbuds, my hands trembling slightly as I turned up the volume. The audio was crystal clear. "He hasn't noticed a thing," Sarah was saying, a triumphant, ugly sneer on her face. "The final transfer of the $2.5 million went through this morning. It's all safely in the Apex account, completely untraceable. Blackwood Vineyards will be on its knees by the end of the fiscal year." Gavin chuckled on the other end. "And if he does notice, Sarah, that trust his old man set up is supposed to be ironclad." Sarah took a contemptuous sip of wine, my wine, from my vineyard. "Please," she scoffed. "He's a sentimental old fool. He'll crumble. He always does. He's too busy mourning his dead wife and talking to grapevines to see what's happening right under his nose. Once the bank forecloses, we buy the whole operation for 10 cents on the dollar. Then we own Napa, my love. The Blackwood name will be a footnote in the story of the Valentine estate." She raised her glass to the camera. "To us." Gavin raised a glass of whiskey in return. "To us. And to the end of the old guard." I saved the recording, my thumb pressing down on the screen with more force than necessary. The rage was so pure, so absolute, it felt like a clarifying fire. It burned away the last vestiges of hurt and left only a diamond-hard certainty. She hadn't just underestimated me. She had desecrated the memory of my family, of my father, of Mary. She had laughed at my life's work while drinking its fruits. But there was another piece of the puzzle that fell into place, an unexpected gift from her own arrogance. Sarah, in her quest to value her prize, had hired her own private investigator, a graphic scop named Lenny Jenkins. She wanted a full workup on me, every hidden asset, every penny, and a deep dive into the vineyard's true market value. She wanted to know exactly how much she stood to gain. Lenny was good at his job, too good for Sarah's purposes. Ellie's Pie learned of his hiring, and through a network of old contacts, managed to get a copy of his final report before it even landed on Sarah's desk. It was a masterpiece of due diligence. Lenny had meticulously detailed every asset I held, confirming that nearly everything was tied up in the legacy trust. He'd valued the vineyard at a staggering figure, far more than Sarah had imagined. His report was a thorough, independent, third-party validation of everything Ellie and I were preparing to argue in court. Sarah had paid for the very evidence that would be used to destroy her. The irony was so rich, so darkly humorous, it almost made me laugh out loud there among the vines. I now had the smoking gun, the video of her confession. I had the forensic accounting trail. And I had her own investigator's report as the cherry on top. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. It was time to file for divorce. It was time to spring the trap. Part 5, The Bitter Harvest. The day I served Sarah with divorce papers was a beautiful, sunny afternoon in Napa. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I found her by the pool, lounging on a chaise, wearing a ridiculously large sun hat and sunglasses that probably cost more than my first truck. She was flipping through a glossy magazine, the picture of bored opulence. I placed the envelope on the table beside her cocktail. "I think you should read this," I said, my voice even. She slid her sunglasses down her nose and looked at the envelope, then at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "What is this, Rob? Don't tell me it's more boring paperwork for the Vineyard." "It's from my lawyer," I said. Her manicured hand, slow at first, picked up the envelope. She tore it open. Her eyes scanned the first page. The words "petition for dissolution of marriage" were impossible to miss. The mask of bored indifference fell away, replaced by a flash of disbelief, then a cold, calculating fury. She stood up, the magazine sliding to the ground. "Are you out of your mind? You're divorcing me." "That's the general idea," I said calmly. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "You senile old fool. Do you have any idea what you've just done? This is California, community property. I'll take you for everything you're worth. I will own half of this legacy you're so pathetic about." "I don't think you will," I said, turning to walk away. "Oh, I will," she shrieked at my back. "My lawyer will strip you bare. You'll be living in a shack by the time I'm done with you. You will regret this for the rest of your miserable, dirt-stained life." I kept walking. The performance was exactly what I expected. She saw this not as the end of a marriage, but as the beginning of a hostile takeover. She had no idea she had already lost. The next few weeks were a masterclass in narcissistic rage and entitlement. She hired a notoriously aggressive shark of a divorce attorney from Lowe's Angels, who immediately filed a motion demanding temporary spousal support of $50,000 a month, exclusive use of the house, and a court order to freeze all of Blackwood Vineyard's assets. Ellie calmly batted away each demand. In our response, we agreed to a modest, temporary support payment, just enough to keep the judge from seeing me as vindictive, and pointed out that the house was a trust asset, not community property. On the matter of freezing the Vineyard's assets, Ellie's filing was a work of art. She simply attached the title page of the Blackwood Family Legacy Trust and a single sentence. "All business assets are held within the following irrevocable trust and are not subject to community property claims." Sarah's reaction was explosive. She paraded around Napa, playing the victim. She told anyone who would listen that her cruel, aging husband was trying to throw her out on the street with nothing, that I was hiding money, that I was mentally unstable. She was laying the groundwork for her narrative, the poor, supportive wife being cast aside by a greedy, controlling patriarch. Her lawyer, emboldened by Sarah's lies, filed a ridiculously ambitious claim. They weren't just asking for half the value of any assets acquired during the marriage. They were claiming that Sarah's managerial efforts in overseeing the modernization had significantly increased the Vineyard's potential value, and therefore she was entitled to a massive stake in the business itself. They were coming for the Vineyard. It was the central pillar of their strategy. The deposition was held in a sterile conference room in San Francisco. Sarah sat across the table, looking smug and confident in a severe, expensive-looking suit. She lied with an ease that was almost breathtaking. "I poured my heart and soul into that Vineyard," she said, her voice catching with fake emotion. "I saw its potential when Rob was content to let it stagnate. I worked tirelessly to bring it into the 21st century. The $2.5 million investment was my brainchild, a strategic move to secure our future." Ellie, calm and methodical, let her talk. She led her down the garden path with gentle, unassuming questions. "And this company, Apex Strategic Holdings," Ellie said, peering at a document. "They were a key vendor in this modernization." "Yes," Sarah said confidently. "They are a top-tier financial strategy firm. Gavin Reynolds is a genius. And your relationship with Mr. Reynolds is purely professional?" "Of course," Sarah said without blinking. Ellie just made a small note on her pad. And you believe, MS Valentine, that your efforts directly contributed to the health and profitability of Blackwood Vineyards? Absolutely, Sarah said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with righteousness. Without my intervention, the vineyard would be failing. I saved it, and I am entitled to my share of what I helped build. As we left the deposition, Sarah shot me a look of pure, triumphant venom. She thought she had won. She thought her narrative was set in stone. She had no idea that every lie she had just told under oath was a nail she was hammering into her own coffin. The harvest was almost ready. Part 6. The Uncorking of Truth. The courtroom in the San Francisco Superior Court was old and imposing, with dark wood paneling and ceilings so high they seemed to gather shadows. The air was thick with a tense, formal silence. Sarah was sitting at the plaintiff's table, whispering with her lawyer. She looked radiant, dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit, the picture of aggrieved sophistication. She occasionally glanced over at me with a look of pitying contempt. The old fool in his off-the-rack suit. Her lawyer began, painting a grand portrait of Sarah as a savvy businesswoman, a modern visionary trapped in a marriage with a man who was stuck in the past. He presented documents, the ones she had fabricated, showing her sweat equity, her strategic oversight of the $2.5 million investment fund. He argued that her efforts were the only thing keeping Blackwood Vineyards relevant, and that to deny her a significant share of the business would be a gross miscarriage of justice under California's community property laws. It was a compelling performance, full of righteous indignation. When he was finished, the judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Atherton, looked over at our table. "MS Hawkins, your response?" Ellie rose slowly, a sheaf of papers in her hand. She was the calm center of the storm. "Your Honor," she began, her voice filling the courtroom, "we appreciate Mr. Davies' spirited work of fiction. Now let's talk about reality." She started methodically, clinically. First, she presented the Blackwood Family Legacy Trust, explaining its ironclad provisions. She showed how every asset Sarah was claiming was, by law, my sole and separate property. Sarah's lawyer objected, calling it an attempt to hide marital assets. "Objection overruled," Judge Atherton said, already looking intrigued. "The trust appears to be in perfect legal order. Proceed, MS Hawkins." Next, Ellie called her first witness, a stone-faced forensic accountant. He walked the court through a complex but clear presentation, displaying bank statements and wire transfers on the large screen. He showed, with irrefutable proof, that the entire $2.5 million had been funneled not to irrigation suppliers or equipment manufacturers, but through a series of shell companies, all culminating in a single account belonging to Apex Strategy. C Holdings LLC. "And who," Ellie asked, "is the sole signatory and beneficiary of that account?" "Mr. Gavin Reynolds," the accountant said. Sarah was starting to look less confident. Her perfect posture was beginning to slump. Then Ellie presented the private investigator's report. "Your Honor," she said, "this is a report commissioned not by my client but by the plaintiff, MS Valentine herself. It's a comprehensive valuation of Blackwood Vineyards and Mr. Blackwood's premarital assets, conducted by a Mr. Leonard Jenkins." She handed a copy to the judge and to Sarah's stunned lawyer. "As you can see, the plaintiff's own expert corroborates our position entirely, confirming that the vast majority of the estate's value is protected by the legacy trust." Sarah's face had gone pale. Her lawyer was frantically flipping through the report, his face a mask of disbelief. He'd been completely blindsided, but Ellie was just getting warmed up. This was the overture. The opera was about to begin. "Your Honor," Ellie said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more grave. "My opponent has painted a picture of MS Valentine as the savior of Blackwood Vineyards. He claims her financial stewardship was designed to increase its value. We contend the opposite. We contend that MS Valentine and her associate, Mr. Gavin Reynolds, engaged in a deliberate, premeditated conspiracy to sabotage Blackwood Vineyards, to devalue it to the point of bankruptcy, so they could purchase it for pennies on the dollar." A gasp went through the small gallery. Sarah's lawyer leaped to his feet. Objection, this is an outrageous and unsubstantiated accusation. Is it, counselor? Ellie asked calmly. Your Honor, I would like to play a short recording for the court. It was captured by a security camera in Mr. Blackwood's office at the winery. The date is October 14th. The judge nodded. Proceed. A technician dimmed the lights slightly and turned on the large monitor. And there it was, the feed from my office. Sarah pacing back and forth, my wine in her hand, the smug, slick face of Gavin Reynolds on her laptop screen. The audio, crisp and clear, filled the silent courtroom. He hasn't noticed a thing. The final transfer of the $2.5 million went through this morning. Blackwood Vineyards will be on its knees. I watched Sarah. All the color drained from her face. Her mouth fell open in a silent O of horror. She looked like she had seen a ghost, her own. The courtroom listened, utterly captivated to every damning word. Her dismissal of me as a sentimental old fool, her plan to force a foreclosure, her lover's complicity, and finally her triumphant, cruel toast. Then we own Napa, my love. The Blackwood name will be a footnote in the story of the Valentine estate. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and damning. Every eye was on Sarah. She was frozen, her face a grotesque mask of shock and terror. She looked at her lawyer, who stared back, utterly defeated. She looked at the judge, whose face was like carved granite. Then her eyes found mine. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a fool or a mark. She was looking at the man who had orchestrated her complete and utter ruin. There was no pity in my gaze, only the cold, satisfying finality of a debt being paid in full. Ellie let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the killing blow. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. This wasn't a misguided investment. This was premeditated corporate sabotage and grand larceny. We are not here to debate community property. We are here to witness the consequences of profound betrayal. We ask not only that all of the plaintiff's claims be dismissed with prejudice, but that the court enforce Article 9, Section B of the Blackwood Family Legacy Trust, the Faithless Partner Clause. We demand full restitution of the diverted $2.5 million, plus interest and all associated legal fees. Sarah made a small, choking sound. The judge looked down at her, her expression one of utter disdain. The uncorking was complete. All that was left was for the bitter truth to be poured out. Part 7, Savoring the New Year. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Judge Atherton delivered her ruling with a kind of weary contempt for Sarah that was almost surgical in its precision. She dismissed every single one of Sarah's claims. She upheld the legacy trust in its entirety. And she invoked the Faithless Partner Clause with what I can only describe as grim satisfaction. Serafina Valentine was ordered to repay the full $2.5 million, plus interest, directly to Blackwood Vineyards. She was also responsible for my legal fees, which, thanks to Ellie's meticulous work, were substantial. Sarah didn't scream or rage as she had before. She simply crumpled. The carefully constructed facade of the glamorous, powerful woman shattered, leaving behind a desperate, terrified fraud. She left the courtroom not with a triumphant stride, but with the shuffling, hollowed-out gait of a ghost. Her shark of a lawyer had already distanced himself from her, a rat fleeing a sinking ship. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The news of the verdict, and especially the details of the audio recording, spread through the tight-knit Napa community like a wildfire. Sarah wasn't just divorced, she was exiled. Her social circle vanished overnight. Invitations were rescinded. Phone calls went unreturned. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at wine tastings and charity dinners. Unable to repay the massive judgment against her, she was forced into bankruptcy within 3 months. Her assets, the designer clothes, the jewelry I'd bought her, the luxury car, were seized and liquidated. The last I heard, she was living in a drab, rented apartment in a Central Valley town, working some menial job, stripped of everything she had schemed and cheated to acquire. She had harvested nothing but ruin. Gavin Reynolds faced his own reckoning. Ellie had forwarded the evidence to the district attorney's office, and he was facing multiple felony charges for fraud and conspiracy. For me, the victory was quiet but profound. The vineyard, which had teetered on the brink, was saved. With the recovered funds, I immediately purchased the new irrigation system and harvesting equipment. The following season's harvest was one of the best in a decade, as if the vines themselves were breathing a sigh of relief. The story of the betrayal and my victory brought a strange kind of fame. Investors, impressed by the resilience of the vineyard and the foresight of the legacy trust, came calling. Blackwood Vineyards entered a new era of prosperity, stronger and more respected than ever. But the real change was internal. The ordeal had scoured me clean of my own naivete. It had reawakened the shrewd, cautious part of me I'd inherited from my father, the part I had let fall asleep. I was no longer just a vintner, I was a guardian. A few months later, on a cool evening, I sat in my office. The room was quiet, peaceful. I poured myself a glass of the 08 Reserve, the same vintage I'd been drinking the night I gave Sarah control of the funds. The wine tasted different now, richer, more complex. It tasted of survival. I walked over to the mantelpiece where a framed photo of my father stood. He was younger, standing in the vineyard, a proud, confident smile on his face. I raised my glass to him. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "You always were." I used a portion of the recovered money to establish a foundation in his name. The Blackwood Legacy Foundation, dedicated to providing legal aid and resources to small, family-owned businesses fighting hostile takeovers and corporate predation. Sarah's betrayal in the end would fuel something good. Her poison would become an antidote for others. I took a slow sip of wine, savoring the taste of a hard-won peace. The vineyard was safe. The legacy was secure. I was alone again, but I was not lonely. I had my roots, my work, and a newfound understanding of the world. The fog was lifting, and a new year, a new vintage, was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content. Share your thoughts on what happened in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click on the video appearing on your screen now.